Hi there. So, in this video, I would like to talk about our expectations or expectations. So, where do expectations come from? And what I mean by expectations is when we expect something to happen, or in other words, we have hope for something to happen in the future, in the far future, or the near future, which will come into our present and hopefully make our lives better. And what happens when we have expectations, and where do they come from, and where do we begin to have expectations? So I would say that we begin to have expectations when we're young, when we're children. Um, if we've been blessed to come from a home where we've had a mother and a father, where we've had healthy boundaries within our home, if we've been blessed to grow up in a home where things were provided for us, and this is kind of the beginning of expectations, where we can learn to trust in our family, learn to trust in our parents, and learn to trust that things will be provided for us. On the other hand, the opposite situation can be that you grew up in a home where you had failed expectations, or your expectations weren't met. Um, you may have come from a broken home, a mother and a father separated, divorced, and you learned very early that things were not secure, and it was hard to trust in your mom, or you may have one of your parents more. It was easier to trust, let's say, your mom rather than your dad. Um, it could be the other way around too, but it made it very difficult for you to hope for things. You may have had a roof over your head, or several roofs over your head if you lived in two homes. Um, but God's design for the family is to bring up children in a secure situation, and so God wants children to be holy. He wants kids to experience security. Um, and back to expectations, if we learn at a young age that the things we desire the most, the things that we crave the most, are things which are not being met because of negative circumstances in our family life, we can grow up really with a deficit, a really like an emptiness, a feeling of being empty. And so that that is what I want to touch upon. But I'm going to go back to to God's design, and how God intended for things to be. God doesn't want us as adults to live in fear. He doesn't want us to be in an unstable state of mind, where we don't know if we're going to have a roof over our head, if we don't know if our needs are going to be met. um, so he designed the family to create that stability from the very start, so kids can learn to trust, so kids can learn to trust God, and to trust mom and dad. um, and it can become very difficult as an adult to learn to find that source of where, who's going to meet my needs. And so expectations hold come with a sense of not just material things. We can expect, if we're kids, we can expect to wake up and have breakfast provided for us. We can expect to have a roof over our head. We can expect to have mom and dad love each other. We can expect to live in a stable home. And I apologize if this is sensitive for any of you listening. I really don't know what type of situation you were brought up in, but I'm just talking about where we learn to trust, and where these expectations come from. And so if we learn as kids that things like food and shelter and clothing and having a stable relationship with mom and dad are things that were denied us in whole or in part. We can grow up really feeling torn. And so I just pray, my prayer for those people who have experienced that sort of thing growing up is that you will learn to trust, because it's never late to learn to trust. And you may be really struggling with who to trust or what to trust. And I think it starts by understanding that when you were younger, you had needs that went unmet. You expected something from mom or you expected something from dad, and it never happened. And as an adult, you live with that sense of emptiness. Um, I personally believe that God can heal anybody of that sense of emptiness if you give him a chance. Um, Family should be a sense, a really sense of support in anybody's in your life. And it's never too old. You're never too old to reestablish those boundaries that may have been crossed when you were younger. Um, so again, my prayer is, it's about expectations and how do we learn to trust after, you know, things may not be stable now. And so, um, and it begins with your thinking too. And if you can ask God to change the way you think about certain things, it's so important that we have the right perspective when we're looking at past childhood trauma and learning to ask God to heal that trauma. Um, Trauma can be very difficult because you can find yourself trapped in a cycle of that negativity that just feeds that hurt. It's kind of like when you have a wound and you don't give time for that wound to heal. You don't, apply the proper medicine or bandage to that wound. Trauma, if it's constantly being aggravated by our own thoughts, by what we perceive in the circumstances around us. Again, I apologize if this is sensitive for some people, but um, expectations are very important. And I just want to conclude by saying, as adults, we need doesn't it doesn't it would have been helpful if we would have had a better situation growing up. But as adults, we can learn to trust again, and we can learn to have the expectations. Now as adults, there'll be different expectations, but we can learn to have um, the same type of expectations as adults, that maybe as we were growing up, we didn't have that sense of security or that sense of our expectations being met. So I just pray that on your journey, we're all on a journey. It doesn't matter where we came from, but we're all on a journey. And so I pray that in your journey, regardless of the way things are now, um, that God will help you to look to friends, family, those who will give you a sense of security, um, and so you can live with that sense of expecting something good to happen in your life. Thanks for listening.